Okay, hey, welcome to another episode of On the Wrist from Off the Cuff. Today we have a really great comparison for you, brought to you in part by Belmont Watches. Definitely check them out. They're located out in San Diego, but they do sell everything pretty much online. So they do actually have a location if you are in the area, but you do have to kind of call ahead to make an appointment. But I do highly recommend them, and they were kind enough to lend both of these units in for a quick little comparison. Now, I'm sure you guys are recognizing the watches here. Pretty iconic, I mean, at least on the Rolex side. And then if you are into Rolex, chances are you know a little bit about Tudor. And you probably know the Ranger, and you know about this release, and you are excited about the size being 39 millimeters, or maybe you wanted a 36, but there are other 36 millimeter options. Not the same for the Rolex. This is the 39 millimeter Explorer, which has been discontinued, and I really wanted to get these side by side just so you could see how close they are in actual profile and wear experience, because they actually do come pretty close to each other. It is really surprising. Also, I wanted to get a look at the lume coloration on the Ranger, because from all the pictures that I saw, it just had a little bit more of a green tint than I had liked. I will say in person, it is probably closer to a creamy color that you're used to from other Tudor lume. But it does definitely have that kind of patinaed style to it. But yeah, the main thing is kind of having these side by side, you know, comparing the way that the size of the dials and to the case, to the bezel, and all those different types of ratios, so you can figure out if, let's say, the Ranger might be the watch you're looking for, or if you should hold out and try to find a nice used example of the 39 millimeter Explorer. So with all of that out of the way, let's go ahead, zoom the camera out, get these pieces in hand, and take a closer look. All right, so let's get them both up so you guys can get a look. We'll just play this visually here for a second. Okay, let me let the camera focus on these. Okay, cool, maybe coming a little closer. So take a look at that, guys. Very, very similar side profile, although quite different. Still has a similar silhouette, and then of course this one is a little bit more well loved than this model, which is basically still new. It's just been sized. In terms of the bracelet, you can see the taper there, and we'll get into the details kind of point by point, but just figured I'd jump out and do that. So with that, let me start with Rolex. So a little bit about them. Of course, Rolex was founded by Hans Wilsdorf back in 1905 and originally registered as the brand name Rolex by 1908. They were originally out of London, England, and then eventually would be headquartered out of Geneva, Switzerland from 1920 and on. This is the Rolex Explorer 1, reference number 214270, also known as the 39 millimeter, and this is the later, you know, pretty much the latest iteration of it before that discontinuation, and it is lovely. I have to say, one of the biggest things that really jumped out at me when I finally got this piece in hand was the tolerances. This is really beautifully tight. Everything about it. So it really high tolerances. When you look at where the bracelet and the end link meet, when you even just look at the 3 links themselves on that oyster bracelet, it is just finished to such a high level. Not only finished to a high level, but the fitment is to such a high tolerance that it is truly impressive. So that was really jaw-dropping, and I think it's something that probably doesn't go enough. I think everybody just kind of, hey, Rolexes are shiny, they're great tool watches, but I will say the tolerances are just wow. I mean, this is impressively done in terms, you know, maybe the finish isn't that impressive. It's not doing anything that's special with some, you know, nice hairline brushing and high polishing on that 904 stainless steel, but it's really the fitment for me and the really tight tolerances that impressed. So these this one actually is for sale on Belmont watches, pre-owned for $9,750. So these are discontinued. So the market price is the market price. Whatever they were new doesn't really matter anymore because you can't buy them new unless you get a new old stock, which I imagine would probably cost even more. Now, in terms of the dimensions, 39 millimeters wide with 11.2 millimeters thick and 47.4 millimeters lug to lug. It's made out of 904L stainless steel, and it has this nice flat sapphire that has been raised, and it does have a nice kind of chamfered edge to it, as you can see, as it sits proud above that fixed bezel, which is in a high polish, but with definitely a look of wear to it. And this is probably how the Rolex Explorer should look. It should look worn and explored in, and I dig that, definitely. This particular model was the Rolex brand's original adventure watch, dating back to the early 1950s, with its namesake and overall theme meant to honor the brand's successful summiting of Mount Everest by Sir Edmund Hillary back on May 29th in 1953. Although the now iconic 369 dial seen here wasn't introduced until after the completion of that famed expedition, which I believe it was even still later that year in 1953, where they basically said, hey, well, we did that with a great watch. Let's make this, let's capitalize on it from a marketing perspective and say, hey, the Rolex Explorer, let's make it a model. And let's give it a look, and let's kind of celebrate that that accomplishment. So I thought that was really, really cool, and something that is always going to be a big part of their history. It's powered by the Rolex Automatic Caliber 3132, which is a COSC certified chronometer. It beats at 4 Hertz, which is 28,800 vibrations per second, or 8 beats per second, and it has a 48-hour power reserve. So nothing crazy from that perspective. I know most modern movements now have really moved to extending that power reserve. The nice thing here is you're still getting the 4 Hertz sweep. The dial is actually a flat black, and it almost looks glossy from certain angles, but for me, it's really just the crystal that is giving off a lot of that gloss, and I believe the dial itself is just a nice little kind of flat color, which works for me. I was surprised because in pictures, I guess I kind of always assumed that it was going to be this like lacquery deep black dial, but that's really just kind of the nature of the reflection, and there being no anti-reflective coating underneath that sapphire crystal. Now everything is applied in terms of the indices there, and then the hands are polished and loomed. You get the proprietary Chromolite loom. It has a screw down crown, which is signed, which gives it 100 meters of water resistance. It has 20 millimeter lugs, which is great, and then this tapers down to 15.3 to that full 3-link oyster bracelet with this nicely milled flip lock clasp, as you can see, beautifully signed and wonderfully functional. And it even has a little bit of a quick extension there if you are, you want to let it breathe. Basically, you can get essentially another little bit of it's not a diver's extension, but a similar concept to kind of some of the old school milled diver's extensions, except here it's more meant as just a little relief, so you can get about another half link of room if your wrist starts to swell while you're on those exploring type of adventures. So very nice. But here's the new model, which is kind of the new old model, right? Because it's representing something from the past. So Tudor, a little bit about them. They were also founded by Hans Wilsdorf back in 1926, though, a little bit later than Rolex. And they're really meant to be an affordable alternative to the Rolex brand. This is the Ranger 79950. And it's Tudor's take on an explorer's style of watch. It goes for $3,050 MSRP, or you can get it from Belmont Watches for $29.75. Yes, guys, that is a nice little break there for something that is essentially new. So definitely check them out. Links in the description. 39 millimeter diameter, 12 millimeters thick, including that crystal, of course. And then lug to lug is 47.6, so slightly longer on the lug to lug, but barely, slightly thicker, but barely. And then in terms of the diameter, pretty much right on point at 39 millimeters. It does have a box double domed sapphire, so you can see even at harsh angles it is still quite legible, and there will be very little distortion there, which is nice. So still quite readable. Of course, on the very extreme edge of the crystal there'll be distortion, maybe a little bit of milkiness there for it being a sapphire versus, like, let's say a plexiglass or a mineral, but I think it's well worth it for the extra amount of toughness that it adds. In terms of the dial, it's a little bit more simple. Actually, let's go to the crown, which is signed and screw down, which also gets you the same amount of water resistance. And then the dial is just all printed, so it's very old school from that perspective. It's a little bit more expansive. There's I'd say less strategic space taken. You can see here the Rolex just has a really beautiful balance between the upper and lower portions, and the center area where it just feels a little bit tidier, versus the Tudor feels a little bit more open, which makes you kind of wish there was something else there. Maybe if they would have used 3D block loom like they did in the new Pelagos or the Black Bay Pro, I think that would have been a nice touch. But in this all flat layout, I do kind of wish they would have done a little bit more of a pure white color tint, just to kind of keep things modern, this kind of suiting this beautiful bracelet, which has a little bit less of a taper on it, because this one only tapers down to 15.9, so about 16 millimeters taper. And then this is a really beautiful clasp. Check this out, which actually has a bit of a trick here, because you can pull it out and you can just spring loaded, so it wants to go back, and there's really not much to it. It's just really smart in that. Check that out. Then if you want to make it go in per click, count whichever click it feels the most comfortable on. I just think that's really smart and really nice. And another thing here, actually, I find the brushing on this Tudor, of course it's new, to be, I'd say, even more impressive than on the Rolex, to be quite honest. I mean, it is beautifully done. Just look at how nice that hairline brushing is. Very similar to Omega from that perspective. Very, very fine, very uniform. And one thing Tudor does really great is they'll actually have a beveled chamfer there on the on those lugs, but they won't do it in a high polish. They'll also do it in a brush, which I think looks fantastic and just gives it some really cool dimension and depth. And it's really impressive to get your hands on. So kudos to Tudor. This case, this bracelet, really nicely finished. I wouldn't say from a tolerance standpoint, it's close to the Rolex. The Rolex, I mean, look at that. It almost looks like it could be one piece of metal. Here, there's it's more of a defined delineation in between each. It's not to say that they couldn't do it, but if I look at this, there's definitely, more noticeable gaps, within that build, and it could be on purpose, but it just doesn't. It definitely has more of a functional look to it, and probably a little bit more standard in terms of what you'll see around the industry, versus this being a little bit more industry leading in terms of the fitment and tightness there. It was really, really impressive. So with that said, I actually am not going to put these on wrist because they're actually slightly too small for my very large wrists. Actually, you know what? I can just loosely put them on without closing the clasps. So let's get that going. Okay, as you can see on my 7¼ inch to 7½ inch wrist, this thing wears really beautifully, and I gotta say that 39mm size is just about perfect. Doesn't feel too big, doesn't feel anywhere remotely too small. It just feels like the size of a watch like this, in terms of what it should be. I don't have enough. It's not to say that if you buy this, you won't have enough links if you have the same size. But since this is on loan, I didn't get the full box with the extra links or anything. So you guys can just take a look at that, see how it lays on the wrist. Really beautifully, those rounded edges on that oyster case are really nice, and the high polish, even though it does have quite a bit of wear on there, still do a great job of kind of blending away any heft on this watch head. So really gorgeous. So we'll go ahead and get this over a big old hammy fist there. Hopefully. It's a little warm, so there could be some swelling in the hand before you start laughing. And then we get this piece on, and I will have to say, very similar wear profile. Check that out. Very nice. I love the case on here, the bracelet, really fantastic. That clasp is amazing. The dial, for me, is the only spot that leaves me wishing. The nice thing is it doesn't have anything bad. You know, it doesn't have some weirdly integrated date or anything like that. You know, it doesn't have any black eyes. There's no defects. There's nothing offensive about it. I just wish that it had a little bit something more. And, you know, it's not to say that they won't. This is just the first, or I should say second reiteration of the modern Ranger. But it's not to say that they won't update this again. And hey, maybe they'll do a pro model of the Ranger and give it some cool 3D blocked lume, and you know, maybe even give it the Explorer 2 motif of having a steel fixed 24-hour bezel and make it a GMT watch. Who knows? So that would be pretty cool. But you can see lays really nice on the wrist, nothing crazy. Gosh, that brushing is just so nice. This thing is really nice, I have to say. Very impressed by this piece. I've seen a lot of Tudors, but I think this is probably the one that I spent really close kind of time proximity with, just being alone with it versus just checking something out at a meet and somebody pulling it off their wrist, or something being laid out, you know, on a watch roll or something like that. So this is actually really nice. So very, very cool. I think even though Tudor really is a tool watch brand, at least it's in its design DNA, the finishing on here is just really, really impressive, even though it's very sedate, right? I'd say I'd liken it to something like a Porsche 911. You know, it's not a Ferrari, it's not a Lamborghini. You know, it doesn't have anything too exciting happening, but everything that is happening is purposeful, and it's just executed to such a high level, you can't help but respect it. So very, very cool. So with that said, let's actually quickly try to get some lume shots and low light transition and move into some closing thoughts. Okay, let's go ahead and hit the lights here. Wow, as you can see, that blue chromolite is just glowing away, and then whatever of that tinted and you know, patinaed lume that Tudor uses is actually quite potent, especially when you consider the fact that, you know, these aren't some big 3D markers. That is purely printed on. So whatever compound that they're using is pretty impressive in my opinion. But one thing I like to do, apart from just highlighting the potency of the lume, is get into some low light transition, because you're not always going to be out in the middle of a field enjoying direct sunlight. So it's nice to see how these colors, finishes, and you know, textures render in less than optimal lighting, to even include maybe some harsh lighting, high contrast here that would typically expose any types of defects or wear. And you can see there's a lot of wear on the Explorer, but everywhere else you can see the finishing there. The light just glides very uniformly. It isn't too wild and unpredictable. It just glides over that fine hairline brushing really, really well. So very impressive that the brushing was so nice. That's what, you know, got me going on it. That is definitely admirable on the part of Tudor. So very cool. And you can see even in mixed lighting conditions, both of these watches stay very, very legible, and are still quite, you know, readable. You know what? I think maybe this dial on the Tudor, maybe if they would have gone with a gilt motif instead of I think maybe that with this lume might have looked better. Comment down below in terms of what you think. But I think the way that it is now with the polished, you know, more silver tone handset, that if it was in black, I think it probably would have been better. I'm sorry, not black. If it would have been like a more stark white, it would have been better. Is that something on the, I don't know if I want that on. Just in case. All right. So closing thoughts, guys. These things are awesome, and I don't know which one is the one for you. I'd say that the Rolex probably has more versatility because it is quite dressy as well. Not necessarily on purpose. I think it just has become dressy, one, because it's quality, two, because the brand is definitely a legitimate luxury brand in terms of the way that they're handled and run. Although this is just a tool watch, which really isn't meant to be luxurious. It's luxurious within its capabilities and its reliability and its dependability. So that's another thing you could probably liken it to Porsche versus something like a Ferrari or a Lamborghini, which might be overall more exciting, but at the end of the day, more complex and maybe, you know, not necessarily worth the complexity for that type of personality. For me, geez, there's definitely a big price difference between these two. I don't think the Tudor would really cut it for me in terms of like, hey, I would never want an Explorer one if I just had this Tudor. I don't think that's the case at all. I think there's other watches that, I mean, even the Seiko Alpinist, one of the many variations of that, but there's tons of other watches that can kind of give you similar vibes if it's going to be a filler watch. And that's, I think for me, that's where Tudor slash Rolex kind of gets this wrong is, as a filler watch, there are better filler watches. But at the end of the day, there should be something about this Tudor Ranger that pulls you in and makes you want it for its own merits. Unfortunately for me, in its current configuration, I like it and I can appreciate it, and gosh, if somebody gifted it to me, I would wear it proudly. But I just, you know, I probably wouldn't get one just on my own. There's other watches that I think I'd like better. And the Rolex Explorer one is, for me, is still very aspirational, only in the 39mm because the 36 is just a bit too small for my larger wrist. But let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. If you like the video, please hit like. And if you haven't already, please do subscribe for more content just like this. Thanks, guys.